The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram and greetings from Prashanthi Nilayam. It is a pleasure to be with you once again and welcome you to the 27th episode in our series entitled The Message of the Lord. We are reaching towards the end of this series, and in this presentation we would like to discuss some aspects of problem solving with particular reference to the teachings of Bhagwan Baba.
Right from the days of the caveman, humans have always encountered problems. For example, early humans had problems with finding food daily. They had problems with accommodation. They had to face danger from wild animals, reptiles, and so on. However, blessed as they were with intelligence by God, humans also learned how to solve problems as they came along. For example, they tamed animals, learned to farm, live in communities and share problems and difficulties, and so on. As man accumulated knowledge and human society advanced in many ways, problems also grew, often becoming more and more complex. Thus it is that even today, after so much of scientific and technological advances, hundreds of millions of ordinary people continue to have constant worries about food, water, and shelter. The rich also have their own worries, such as job security, concern about personal safety, and so on. Even countries have worries about security threats, food shortage, financial stability, etc. Many of these problems may seem like purely worldly problems. However, since most of them are connected with the human mind, there is inevitably a spiritual dimension to both the origin of the problem as well as its solution. Unfortunately, most people are so busy that they do not notice these problems. Even so, there are many concerned people who do worry about these problems and even try to solve them. I mentioned to you earlier that world statesmen met in the year 2000 to define clear goals and targets for solving many pressing problems, and that they subsequently published what has come to be called the Millennium Goals. All such efforts are very commendable, no doubt. However, as we noted then, at the end of the day, most of these meetings do not really produce any tangible results. That is because currently problem solving is approached invariably in a fragmented manner. What is needed is an out-of-the-box approach, a holistic approach that goes beyond the limitations and the prejudices of the human mind, and thus free from selfishness and self-interest. In trying to find solutions to modern problems, we have to be careful enough to realize that sometimes what we imagine to be improvement and progress actually results in new and more complex problems. I am sure you're confused, and so let me give you an example. Take a good look at this car, which belongs to the 1930-1940 vintage. Those were the early days of the auto industry, and cars were neither as streamlined nor as fuel efficient as at present. That must be freely conceded. However, One thing going for those cars was that they could be more easily repaired than current models. In America, for example, people in those days used to take pride in fixing their own cars most of the time. In India, on the other hand, while car owners seldom carried out their own repairs, there were any number of roadside garages where repairs could be done. That in turn meant employment for many people. So, there were pluses and minuses with old technology. Then came progress, and we have the modern cars which unquestionably are superior to older cars in many ways. But you know, automobile technology has also become very complex. As you are aware, most cars of today rely very heavily on computer controls, and that the complex electronic system accounts for nearly half the cost of the car. Thanks to such complexity, these days even cars have to have a scan when taken for repairs. Yes, automobile technology has progressed by leaps and bounds, but at a cost. One part of the cost is job loss. Part of the job loss occurs in the manufacturing sector where robots replace humans. Jobs are lost in the auto repair sector also because car repairs cannot be done by the roadside auto mechanic anymore. Rather, cars now require their own super specialty hospitals. We, who regularly use so many gadgets, are thrilled by them. But we hardly realize how many manufacturing jobs are lost as a result of mass production and technological complexity. It is time to realize that when people are replaced by machines in large numbers, it creates huge unemployment problems. In other words, while mass production might be good for making profits, it leads to a lot of unemployment, and that can cause all kinds of problems. And believe me, when unemployment becomes rampant, social unrest rises steeply. The message is loud and clear. Mass production may be good for corporations, but it is production by the masses that would really benefit society. We seldom realize that there are really two different worlds on the same planet. One world is that of affluent people, the haves as they are often called. These people do not have to worry about food, home, jobs, education, healthcare, and so on. They have money, which would give them protection against such problems. Of course, they have other problems, but that is a different issue. We shall come to that later, maybe. Consider now the have-nots who live in a world of their own. Their problems are such that affluent people simply cannot understand them. I mean, how can a person who has never gone hungry understand what it means to starve simply because there is no money to buy food? And such is the state of affairs today that these problems associated with low income and poverty keep lingering and multiplying with no sign of going away. Please do not imagine we are arguing against technology. Not at all. I mean, without technology, humans would not have been able to travel easily and in large numbers, for example. A lot of drudgery was also removed through the use of machines. Let us also not forget that Swami's hospitals use technology all over the place. And by the way, without technology, I would not be able to present this series. So, we are not opposing technology per se, and that should be quite clear. At the same time, when technology began to promote unwanted and excessive consumerism, it began to create problems in many different ways. Firstly, there was the issue of waste. Slowly but surely, the amount of waste generated began to multiply. Indeed, there were so many different kinds of wastes. No doubt this has led to a certain amount of recycling, but with the rate of consumption rapidly growing, the recycling load also is increasing. And remember, recycling means energy consumption, which in turn produces its own pollution, leading to its own social cost. The real problem with technology is that it gets heavily exploited for making money and profits, huge profits in fact. And very often, such profits come from exploitation. Exploitation creates wealth for a few while keeping many in poverty. That is asymmetry, and these days there is plenty of asymmetry. The real problem about asymmetry is that it could lead to a storm. Have you ever seen a storm, a cyclone, or a hurricane? Do you know how these usually originate? Basically, they are produced when there is a huge difference in the atmospheric pressure in two regions of the globe that are not too far apart. In other words, air from high pressure region rushes to the low pressure region, and that is how big storms are born. In human society, there are all kinds of asymmetries associated with inequity of various kinds, associated with wealth, education, job opportunities, access to healthcare, and so on. Inevitably, such inequity produces tension, crime, violence, and even big conflicts. In big metro cities, the rich and the poor often live near each other. The poor can constantly see and at close quarters the luxurious style of living and shopping the rich and the affluent have access to, the kind of education they can get, the kind of hospital care they can have when they fall sick, and so on. Not merely that, the rich often flaunt their extravagant lifestyle. Is it any wonder that this produces anger in the poor? They wonder, these people seem to have so much money to literally throw around. Why can't they spend some of it to help people like us? By the way, this is exactly what Swami told the big industrialists in Bombay City, now known as Mumbai, when he went there in March 1999. Getting back to the asymmetry issue, some of the have-nots just don't fume in anger. Instead, they take to crime, so that they too can get some money, maybe not for leading a life of luxury, but at least to buy some food. The growth of crime in big cities is not confined to any one country. Rather, it is a global phenomenon, for the simple reason that inequity always arouses anger, which then leads to violence. Here is another example of how inequity leads to a violent reaction. Some of you might have noticed that in recent years, piracy on the high seas in the neighborhood of the Red Sea and East African coast has been much in the news. The pirates, almost all of whom are from Somalia, have been widely condemned, but few people have bothered to ask, how come this region, which was quite safe for centuries, in fact, suddenly became pirate-infested? Some have investigated the matter and discovered that the growth of piracy was the direct result of a lot of injustice inflicted for decades over the people of that region. In Swami's words, it was a good example of reflection, reaction, and resound. What actually happened was the following. Most of the people living on the coast of Somalia were poor fishermen. For centuries, they caught fish without disturbance from others, and thus enjoyed a certain measure of food security. And then came the big fishing trawlers. These trawlers were really fish factories that could sail across the oceans. With these, the fishermen could literally scoop huge portions of the waters of the sea and collect all the fish therein. They not only caught fish in massive quantities, but could also process them right there on the ship and sell the products off in the next port they called on. Like vultures, these huge trawlers descended on all the rich fishing areas, rapidly depleting the region of all the fish stock, to the point where there was hardly any fishing left. This has happened, for example, in Newfoundland in Canada, where the fishing industry has totally disappeared. In this case, the people who suffered were the locals. They brought their fate upon themselves. In Somalia, this fate was inflicted on the locals by the rich countries from the east to the west. As if this was not enough, the rich countries also dumped a lot of chemical and at times secretly even radioactive waste into the waters off Somalia. And when the great Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 hit, the massive tidal waves scooped up all the waste from the very bottom of the ocean, dumping it into the shallow waters near the shoreline, killing whatever little fishing was left there. Robbed of their livelihood, many fishermen turned pirates. So you see, this business of reflection, reaction, resound that Baba sometimes refers to is very real. People cannot argue, why me? I had nothing to do with such injustice. Unfortunately, nature does not work that way. When a person drinks excessively, it is the liver that gets affected. But once that happens, the whole body faces danger. What it boils down to is, whether we like it or not, protection of dharma is the responsibility of every single individual. No one is exempt, from the king to the pauper.
This is where Swami's powerful analogy between a healthy human body and a healthy society becomes most important. Our bodies may be different, but since the same God is within all of us, we must, if we really love God, discharge our duty to society. I'm afraid we have to wrap up here for today, but tomorrow we shall continue from this point and explain clearly how Baba's teachings not only ties all these points neatly, but also shows the way to actually solve these problems. Thank you for being with us, and do join us again tomorrow for the next episode. Jai Sai Ram.